This is a continuation of the story of the fisherman. Be sure to watch the story of the fisherman part 1, as well as the story of King Yunnan and the sage Duban. Now, O Ephrat, continued the fisherman, know that if King Yunnan had spared the sage Duban, Allah had spared him, but he refused and desired his destruction, therefore Allah destroyed him. And thou, O Ephrat, if thou hadst spared me, Allah had spared thee, and I had spared thee. But thou desiredst my death, therefore will I put thee to death imprisoned in this bottle, and will throw thee here into the sea. The Marid upon this cried out and said, I conjure thee by Allah, O fisherman, that thou do it not, spare me in generosity, and be not angry with me for what I did. But if I have done evil, do thou good, according to the proverb. O thou benefactor of him who hath done evil, the action that he hath done is sufficient for him. Do not therefore as Umame did to Atike. And what, said the fisherman, was their case? The Ephrat answered, This is not a time for telling stories when I am in this prison, but when thou liberatest me, I will relate to thee their case. The fisherman said, Thou must be thrown into the sea, and there shall be no way of escape for thee from it. For I endeavored to propitiate thee, and humbled myself before thee, yet thou wouldest nothing but my destruction, though I had committed no offense to deserve it, and had done no evil to thee whatever, but only good, delivering thee from thy confinement. And when thou didst thus unto me, I perceived that thou wast radically corrupt, and I would have thee know that my motive for throwing thee into this sea is that I may acquaint with thy story every one that shall take thee out, and caution him against thee, that he may cast thee in again. Thus shalt thou remain in this sea to the end of time, and experience varieties of torment. The Ephrat then said, Liberate me, for this is an opportunity for thee to display humanity, and I vow to thee that I will never do thee harm, but on the contrary, will do thee a service that shall enrich thee forever. Upon this, the fisherman accepted his covenant that he would not hurt him, but that he would do him good. And when he had bound him by oaths and vows, and made him swear by the most great name of Allah, he opened to him. And the smoke ascended until it had all come forth, and then collected together, and became, as before, an Ephrat of hideous form. The Ephrat then kicked the bottle into the sea. When the fisherman saw him do this, he made sure of destruction, and said, This is no sign of good. But afterwards he fortified his heart, and said, O Ephrat, Allah, whose name be exalted, hath said, Perform the covenant, for the covenant shall be inquired into. And thou hast covenanted with me, and sworn that thou wilt not act treacherously towards me. Therefore, if thou so act, Allah will recompense thee, for he is jealous, he respiteth, but suffereth not to escape. And remember that I said to thee, as said the sage Duban to King Yunnan, Spare me, and so may Allah spare thee. The Ephrat laughed, and walking on before him said, O fisherman, follow me. The fisherman did so, not believing in his escape, until they had quitted the neighborhood of the city, and ascended a mountain, and descended into a wide desert tract, in the midst of which was a lake of water. Here the Ephrat stopped, and ordered the fisherman to cast his net and take some fish, and the fisherman, looking into the lake, saw in it fish of different colors, white and red and blue and yellow, at which he was astonished, and he cast his net and drew it in, and found in it 4 fish, each fish of a different color from the others, at the sight of which he rejoiced. The Ephrat then said to him, Take them to the Sultan and present them to him, and he will give thee what will enrich thee, and for the sake of Allah accept my excuse, for at present I know no other way of rewarding thee, having been in the sea 1,800 years, and not seen the surface of the earth until now. But take not fish from the lake more than once each day, and now I commend thee to the care of Allah. Having thus said, he struck the earth with his feet, and it clove asunder, and swallowed him. The fisherman then went back to the city, wondering at all that had befallen him with the Ephrat, and carried the fish to his house. And he took an earthen bowl, and, having filled it with water, put the fish into it, and they struggled in the water, And when he had done this, he placed the bowl upon his head and repaired to the king's palace, as the Efrit had commanded him, and, going up unto the king, presented to him the fish. And the king was excessively astonished at them, for he had never seen any like them in the course of his life. And he said, "Give these fish to the slave cookmaid." This maid had been sent as a present to him by the king of the Greeks 3 days before, and he had not yet tried her skill. The wazir therefore ordered her to fry the fish, and said to her, "O maid, the king saith unto thee, I have not reserved my tear but for the time of my difficulty. Today then, gratify us by a specimen of thy excellent cookery, for a person hath brought these fish as a present to the Sultan." After having thus charged her, the wazir returned, and the king ordered him to give the fisherman 400 pieces of gold. So the wazir gave them to him, and he took them in his lap, and returned to his home and his wife, joyful and happy, and bought what was needful for his family. Such were the events that befell the fisherman. Now we must relate what happened to the maid. She took the fish, and cleaned them, and arranged them in the frying pan, and left them until one side was cooked, when she turned them upon the other side, and lo, the wall of the kitchen clove asunder. And there came forth from it a damsel of tall stature, smooth-cheeked, of perfect form, with eyes adorned with kohl, beautiful in countenance, and with heavy swelling hips, wearing a kufiya interwoven with blue silk, with rings in her ears, and bracelets on her wrists, and rings set with precious jewels on her fingers. And in her hand was a rod of Indian cane, and she dipped the end of the rod in the frying pan, and said, "O fish, are ye remaining faithful to your covenant?" At the sight of this, the cookmaid fainted. The damsel then repeated the same words a second and a third time, after which the fish raised their heads from the frying pan and answered, "Yes, yes." They then repeated the following verse, "If thou return, we return, and if thou come, we come, and if thou sake, we verily do the same." And upon this the damsel overturned the frying pan and departed by the way she had entered, and the wall of the kitchen closed up again. The cookmaid then arose, and beheld the 4 fish burnt like charcoal, and she exclaimed, "In his first encounter his staff broke." And as she sat reproaching herself, she beheld the wazir standing at her head, and he said to her, "Bring the fish to the Sultan." And she wept, and informed him of what had happened. The wazir was astonished at her words, and exclaimed, "This is indeed a wonderful event." And he sent for the fisherman, and when he was brought, he said to him, "O fisherman, thou must bring to us 4 fish like those which thou broughtest before." The fisherman accordingly went forth to the lake, and threw his net. And when he had drawn it in, he found in it 4 fish as before, and he took them to the wazir, who went with them to the maid, and said to her, "Rise and fry them in my presence, that I may witness this occurrence." The maid therefore prepared the fish, and put them in the frying pan. And they had remained but a little while when the wall clove asunder, and the damsel appeared, clad as before, and holding the rod. And she dipped the end of the rod in the frying pan, and said, O fish, are ye remaining faithful to your old covenant?" Upon which they raised their heads, and answered as before, and the damsel overturned the frying pan with the rod, and returned by the way she had entered, and the wall closed up again. The wazir then said, "This is an event which cannot be concealed from the king." So he went to him, and informed him of what had happened in his presence. And the king said, "I must see this with my own eyes." He sent therefore to the fisherman, and commanded him to bring 4 fish like the former, granting him a delay of 3 days. And the fisherman repaired to the lake, and brought the fish thence to the king, who ordered again that 400 pieces of gold should be given to him, and then, turning to the wazir, said to him, "Cook the fish thyself here before me." The wazir answered, "I hear and obey." He brought the frying pan, and after he had cleaned the fish, threw them into it, and as soon as he had turned them, the wall clove asunder, and there came forth from it a black slave, in size like a bull, or like one of the tribe of Ad, having in his hand a branch of a green tree. And he said with a clear but terrifying voice, O fish, are ye remaining faithful to your old covenant? Upon which they raised their heads and answered as before, Yes, yes, if thou return, we return, and if thou come, we come, and if thou forsake, we verily do the same. The black then approached the frying pan and overturned it with the branch, and the fish became like charcoal, and he went away as he had come. When he had thus disappeared from before their eyes, the king said, This is an event respecting which it is impossible to keep silence, and there must undoubtedly be some strange circumstance connected with these fish. He then ordered that the fisherman should be brought before him, and when he had come, he said to him, Whence came these fish? The fisherman answered, From a lake between 4 mountains behind this mountain which is without thy city. The king said to him, How many days' journey distant? He answered, O our lord the Sultan, a journey of half an hour. And the Sultan was astonished, and ordered his troops to go out immediately with him and the fisherman, who began to curse the Efrit. They proceeded until they had ascended the mountain, and descended into a wide desert tract which they had never before seen in their whole lives. And the Sultan and all the troops wondered at the sight of this desert, which was between 4 mountains, and at the fish, which were of 4 colors, red and white, and yellow and blue. The king paused in astonishment and said to the troops and to the other attendants who were with him, Hath any one of you before seen this lake in this place? They all answered, No. Then said the king, By Allah, I will not enter my city, nor will I sit upon my throne until I know the true history of this lake and of its fish. And upon this he ordered his people to encamp around these mountains, and they did so. He then called for the wazir, who was a well-informed, sensible, prudent, and learned man, and when he had presented himself before him, he said to him, I desire to do a thing with which I will acquaint thee, and it is this. I have resolved to depart alone this night to seek for information respecting this lake and its fish. Therefore sit thou at the door of my pavilion, and say to the emirs and wazirs and chamberlains, The Sultan is sick, and hath commanded me not to allow any person to go in unto him, and acquaint no one with my intention. He journeyed the whole of the night, until the morning, and proceeded until the heat became oppressive to him. He then paused to rest, after which he again proceeded the remainder of the day and the second night until the morning, when there appeared before him in the distance something black, at the sight of which he rejoiced and said, Perhaps I shall there find some person who will inform me of the history of the lake and its fish. And when he approached this black object, he found it to be a palace built of black stones and overlaid with iron, and one of the leaves of its door was open, and the other shut. The king was glad, and he stood at the door and knocked gently, but heard no answer. He knocked a second and a third time, but again heard no answer. Then he knocked a 4th time, and with violence, but no one answered. So he said, It is doubtless empty. And he took courage, and entered from the door into the passage, and cried out, saying, O inhabitants of the palace, I am a stranger and a traveler. Have ye any provision? And he repeated these words a second and a third time, but heard no answer. And upon this he fortified his heart, and emboldened himself, and proceeded from the passage into the midst of the palace. But he found no one there, and only saw that it was furnished, and that there was in the center of it a fountain with 4 lions of red gold, which poured forth the water from their mouths like pearls and jewels. Around this were birds, and over the top of the palace was extended a net which prevented their flying out. At the sight of these objects he was astonished, and he was grieved that he saw no person there whom he could ask for information respecting the lake and the fish and the mountains and the palace. He then sat down between the doors, reflecting upon these things, and as he thus sat, he heard a voice of lamentation from a sorrowful heart, chanting these verses, O fortune, thou pitiest me not, nor releasest me. See, my heart is straitened between affliction and peril. Will not you, O my wife, have compassion on the mighty whom love hath abased, and the wealthy who is reduced to indigence? We were jealous even of the zephyr which passed over you, but when the divine decree is issued, the eye becometh blind. What resource hath the archer when, in the hour of conflict, he desireth to discharge the arrow, but findeth his bowstring broken? And when troubles are multiplied upon the noble-minded, where shall he find refuge from fate and from destiny? When the Sultan heard this lamentation, he sprang upon his feet, and seeking the direction whence it proceeded, found a curtain suspended before the door of a chamber, and he raised it, and beheld behind it a young man sitting on a couch, raised to the height of a cubit from the floor. He was a handsome youth, well-shaped, and of eloquent speech, with shining forehead and rosy cheek, marked with a mole resembling ambergris. The king was rejoiced at seeing him and saluted him, and the young man, who remained sitting, and was clad with a vest of silk, embroidered with gold, but who exhibited traces of grief, returned his salutation and said to him, "O my master, excuse my not rising." "O youth," said the king, "inform me respecting the lake, and its fish of various colors, and respecting this palace, and the reason of thy being alone in it, and of thy lamentation." When the young man heard these words, tears trickled down his cheeks, and he wept bitterly. And the king was astonished, and said to him, "What causeth thee to weep, O youth?" He answered, "How can I refrain from weeping, when this is my state?" And so saying, he stretched forth his hand, and lifted up the skirts of his clothing, and lo, half of him, from his waist to the soles of his feet, was stone, and from his waist to the hair of his head, he was like other men. He then said, "Know, O king, that the story of the fish is extraordinary. If it were engraved upon the intellect, it would be a lesson to him who would be admonished." And he related as follows in the next story. We hope you enjoyed this story. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe.